They laughed at her old pass, but when the system scanned it, the whole building fell silent. Subscribe and write in the comments where you're watching from, and share this video with your friends. The morning air outside the military complex was heavy with the scent of dew and concrete dust, the kind that settled over the skin like a warning you couldn't quite shake off. The checkpoint gates were humming quietly, cameras scanning the license plates of the few vehicles allowed through at this hour, each click and whir a reminder of the layered security no one dared question. Josh sipped burnt coffee from a paper cup, leaning against the reinforced booth, while his friend Randy scrolled through his phone, snickering at something on the screen. Mike, the oldest of the three, was scratching at the edge of his uniform collar, a red flush creeping up his neck as he watched the road with bored, narrowed eyes. "Bro, did you see that chick yesterday?" Randy said, flicking his screen toward Josh, who squinted at the image of a woman in tight gym clothes. "Man, these girls think they can just wiggle their way into anything. Bet she can't even do a single pull-up." Josh chuckled, tapping the screen before handing it back. "Probably can't, but they think a smile's gonna get them anywhere." Mike let out a low laugh, shaking his head. "What's with these women, man? Always reaching for what they can't handle. Should stick to teaching or daycare, not trying to play soldier." Josh didn't argue. It wasn't that he hated women, he told himself. His mom had been strict, always reminding him that men lead and women follow, and that the world made sense only when everyone stayed in their place. He took another sip of coffee, letting the bitterness burn his tongue. That was when he heard the footsteps. Slow, unhurried, each step echoing against the concrete walkway, calm in a place where people usually hurried under the weight of routine. Josh glanced up, expecting a nervous junior officer, maybe another contractor carrying too many bags. But it was a woman. She wasn't running. She wasn't flustered. She wasn't looking around like she was lost. She was dark-skinned, around 35, with short, neat dreadlocks pulled away from her face, wearing a plain black t-shirt tucked into faded jeans and a light jacket hanging open. She carried a small black shoulder bag worn at the edges. Her posture was straight, eyes focused, like she could see through the checkpoint, through them, through everything. She stopped in front of the booth, standing there in silence as Josh and the others exchanged a look. The morning air seemed to pause with her, the gentle hum of electricity in the gates buzzing just a bit louder. Randy lifted his chin, smirking. "Lost, sweetheart?" The woman didn't answer, didn't blink, didn't even shift her weight. She reached into her bag and pulled out a small, weathered ID card, the edges soft and slightly frayed, the plastic covering cloudy in places as if it had been carried for years. She held it out to Josh, who took it between two fingers, lifting it like it might leave a stain. He turned it over, frowning at the old federal seal that looked outdated, the barcode on the back faint from wear. Randy snorted, leaning over Josh's shoulder. "Is this real? You trying to pass off a library card to get in here?" Mike let out a chuckle, shaking his head. "You know, you're at a military facility, right? You think this is a food drive?" The woman's eyes remained on Josh, calm, unwavering, like she was waiting for a child to finish laughing at his own joke. She didn't speak for a long moment, letting the laughter die out, letting the silence settle around them like a cold blanket. "Scan it," she said softly. Josh's eyebrows shot up, a smirk twisting at the corner of his mouth. "Lady, you do realize where you are, right? This isn't some—" "Scan it," she repeated, the same softness in her voice, but now it felt sharper, like the edge of a knife you couldn't see until it was pressed against your skin. Randy whistled under his breath, folding his arms. "Man, This is gonna be good." Josh rolled his eyes and stepped back toward the scanner, pressing the badge against the glass. Usually, it would beep once, flash red and reject expired or fake IDs without a second thought. He was waiting for the red light, ready to smirk and toss the card back to her with a snide comment about little girls playing spy. Waiting to laugh, but it didn't beep red. The scanner beeped once, then again. The screen flickered, the hum of electricity shifting in pitch, a low droning sound pressing into their ears. "What the hell?" Mike muttered, leaning in. The screen turned blue, then black. For a moment, nothing moved. Even the breeze seemed to stop. Then lines of green code began to scroll across the screen, fast, too fast for the eye to catch. A single gold emblem flared onto the screen, pulsing, bright against the darkness, a symbol none of them recognized. And then everything shut down. The scanner froze. The lights above them flickered once, twice, before dying completely, leaving only the emergency glow of the battery strips along the base of the walls. Radios on their belts crackled, then died. Phones in their pockets buzzed and went dark. "Yo, what did you do?" Randy's voice was higher now, the smirk gone from his face. Josh felt his throat go dry, his fingers still clutching the ID card, his eyes fixed on the emblem still pulsing on the black screen before it, too, blinked out. The woman didn't move, didn't flinch, didn't smile. She simply watched them, her expression calm, her breathing steady. "What is this, some kind of joke?" Mike asked, pulling at his radio, trying to get it to work. The woman took a single step forward, and even that small motion made all three of them tense, like animals sensing a predator they couldn't see. "I said, scan it," she repeated, her voice so soft it was almost gentle, but it was the kind of gentleness that made your stomach twist, the way a calm before a storm makes you hold your breath. Josh swallowed, his mouth dry, looking down at the ID card still in his hand. It felt heavier now, like it was made of lead. "What the hell is this?" he whispered, but it wasn't a question for her, not really. It was for himself, for the fear now crawling up the back of his neck. The badge had done something it shouldn't have been able to do. It wasn't just a badge anymore. It was a key, a signal, a trigger for something far above their pay grades and understanding. In the silence that followed, the woman continued to watch them, waiting, not because she needed to, but because she was letting them realize on their own exactly how small they were, how little their laughter and jokes meant in the face of real authority. And in that silence, every breath they took felt loud. Every rustle of their uniforms felt like an admission of fear. She didn't need to say it, but the truth was already settling in their bones. They had laughed at the wrong person, and now everything around them was answering to her presence alone. As the emergency lights flickered and the hallway seemed to narrow around them, Josh felt the weight of every smirk, every dismissive comment he had ever made, turning into cold, sharp regret. The woman turned her gaze towards the doors that had locked themselves when the system went down. She took another step, and with that single movement, the lights along the floor illuminated, guiding her path while the doors clicked and slowly slid open without a touch. And as she walked through, silent and unhurried, the smirks and the laughter died for good. The hum of silence was the first thing to fill the command room as the systems died. It was a silence so deep it pressed against the ribs, a vacuum that swallowed the usual chatter of keyboards and the quiet buzz of radio traffic. Screens that normally pulsed with blue and green data streams now stood dark, reflecting the pale faces of the analysts who watched in stunned confusion. A blinking cursor on a black screen flickered once, twice, then vanished as the monitors shut down completely, leaving only the low emergency lights casting long shadows across the rows of desks. For a heartbeat, it felt like the building itself was holding its breath. In the security hub, 2 floors above the checkpoint, 2 analysts sat frozen in front of their blank screens, the glow of the backup lights reflecting off their glasses. One of them, a thin man with nervous hands named Clark, reached for the comms switch, toggling it frantically. "Control, this is Ops. Can you read?" His voice cracked, echoing too loud in the sudden quiet. Nothing but static. Beside him, a heavier man with cropped blonde hair, Riley, stared at the feed that had frozen mid-frame, the last image captured before the blackout. It was her. Standing there in her black shirt and jeans, head slightly tilted, her face unreadable. Riley leaned closer, squinting at the ID badge that was still clutched in the guard's hand in the frozen image. "You see that?" he whispered. Clark glanced over, his breath fogging slightly in the cold air. "What is that symbol?" They didn't know it, but downstairs the hallways were shifting under the pressure of her presence. Lights flickered to life in soft bands along the floor wherever she stepped, the automated doors clicking open ahead of her, then closing softly behind as she walked through, alone, without hesitation. Josh, Randy, and Mike followed a few paces behind her now, the swagger drained from their steps, replaced by a tense, stumbling uncertainty. They didn't know why they were following, only that standing still felt impossible as she moved forward with a calm that was heavier than any shout. Josh's radio was dead at his hip, but he kept pressing the button out of habit, the soft click loud in the silent corridor. His eyes were fixed on her back, the way her shoulders, in quiet rhythm, every step deliberate, like she was walking through a place she had known all her life. "Who the hell is she?" Randy muttered, his voice barely a breath. Mike didn't answer, but the way his jaw tightened said he was thinking the same thing. Ahead of them, she reached the end of the hallway where the reinforced doors to the central wing stood closed. Without touching the panel, without pausing, she stepped forward and the lights flared once, twice, then the doors slid open with a hiss. They didn't know it yet, but the building had recognized her. She stepped through, into the stark white hallway of the secure wing, the faint hum of hidden machinery under the floor vibrating softly in the soles of her shoes. Her eyes scanned the corridor, taking in the reinforced windows, the biometric locks, the small cameras that tracked every movement. Except now, those cameras were following her, and only her. From the far end of the hallway, 2 figures appeared, moving with quiet precision. Black suits, white shirts, dark ties. Their shoes made no sound on the polished floor as they approached, their faces set, unreadable. She stopped, and they stopped a few paces away, standing at attention, not out of fear, but out of the quiet respect that comes from recognizing authority that surpasses titles. "Agent Walker," the taller one said, nodding once, a gesture sharp and precise. Josh stumbled to a halt behind her, his eyes darting between the 2 men and the woman he had mocked only minutes before. "She's with you?" His voice cracked, and he hated himself for it. The taller agent didn't look at him. His eyes remained on her, steady and clear. "No," he said quietly, "we're with her." The words hit harder than any shout, ringing in the air, echoing in the hollow of Josh's chest. Randy shifted on his feet, swallowing hard, while Mike lowered his eyes, his fingers twitching at his side. Walker didn't acknowledge their discomfort. She gave a slight nod to the agents, who stepped to the side, falling into place behind her without a word. She moved forward again, passing deeper into the facility, the agents following like shadows. Josh and the others remained rooted to the spot, the weight of the moment pinning them in place. In the operations center above, the screens flickered, sputtering to life, but not with the usual data streams or security feeds. Instead, the golden emblem reappeared, pulsing gently, illuminating the dark room with its soft glow. Clark stared, his mouth opening and closing like a fish, words failing him. Riley leaned forward, the light reflecting in his wide eyes. "That's not a badge," he whispered. "That's a recall key." Down below, the radios remained silent, the phones dead, but everywhere Walker stepped, the facility adapted, doors unlocking without her touch, lights adjusting to her presence, sensors aligning to her movements. It was like the building itself was welcoming her home. The silence in the halls was no longer empty. It was filled with the weight of realization. The guards who had laughed were silent now, their eyes following her every step. They didn't dare to speak, didn't dare to question. She didn't look back. For Josh, the silence was louder than any siren. He remembered every smirk, every dismissive comment he had made in the last hour, the way he had held her ID like it was a joke, the way he had laughed with Randy and Mike about women playing soldier. Now, standing in the hallway lit only by the glow of her passing, he felt that laughter die inside him, replaced by a cold understanding that he had underestimated someone who had never needed to raise her voice to command the world around her. He didn't know who she was, not really, but he understood now that it didn't matter. Because she wasn't there to ask for permission. She was there to take command. And as the agents flanked her, as the doors opened for her alone, as the building reawakened under her quiet authority, Josh realized that he and everyone else who had laughed would remember her face forever. Not because she demanded it, but because the world itself did. And in that moment, under the cold glow of the emergency lights, they all understood that she was not the one they had expected. She was the one they called when the people above them disappeared. The hallways of the facility felt colder the deeper she walked, though the air was still and the lights above her flickered softly in their recessed fixtures. Each step echoed off the polished floors, a quiet, measured rhythm that was more unsettling than any alarm. Behind her, the two agents moved like shadows, their footsteps silent, their presence a reminder that even silence could carry the weight of command. Security personnel, technicians, and analysts stood frozen along the walls, clutching tablets and folders, their eyes darting toward her before quickly dropping to the floor. No one dared to speak. No one dared to step in her path. They all felt it now, the subtle shift in the air that comes when the hierarchy bends around a single person's presence. She wasn't shouting orders. She didn't need to. The way the facility reacted to her told them everything they needed to know. Doors unlocked as she approached, sliding open without her touch, closing softly behind as if sealing away any hesitation left in the building. Lights adjusted as she moved, brightening where she walked, dimming where she passed, the entire system bending itself to her path like it had been waiting for her return. The security cameras tracked her alone, their lenses whirring softly, ignoring everyone else, feeding her image to screens across the building where analysts sat in stunned silence. In the operations center, Clark and Riley leaned forward in their chairs, the golden emblem still pulsing on the screens around them. Clark's fingers hovered over his keyboard, but he didn't dare type. The emblem felt like an eye watching him, warning him that even the wrong keystroke could be a mistake too big to take back. "She's bypassing every layer," Clark whispered, his voice trembling. Riley's eyes didn't leave the screens. "No," he corrected softly. "She's not bypassing anything. The system is opening for her." In the lower levels, Josh, Randy, and Mike followed at a distance, moving carefully, their earlier arrogance drained, replaced by the cautious silence of men who had discovered the limits of their authority too late. Josh's thoughts spiraled as he watched her from down the hall. He remembered how she had stood there at the checkpoint, calm, unwavering, as he and the others had laughed, tossing out their usual lines, mocking her for daring to stand where they thought she didn't belong. He remembered the way she had simply told him to scan her ID, the softness in her voice that had carried a weight his smirk couldn't touch. Now, seeing the building itself bow to her presence, he realized she had never needed to argue. She had let them laugh because she knew the silence that followed would speak louder. She reached the reinforced doors to the central control wing, where the facility's master systems were housed, the heartbeat of the building's security and operations. 2 guards stood at attention on either side of the door, their hands tightening around their rifles as they saw her approach. For a brief moment, they glanced at each other, as if considering whether to stop her, to ask for clearance, to demand credentials. But then the doors clicked and slid open without her touching the panel, the lights inside flaring to life, the screens within lighting up with lines of green code, the golden emblem shimmering in the center of every monitor. The guards stepped back without a word. She walked inside. The room was vast, lined with servers that hummed softly, blinking with tiny indicator lights like the eyes of watchful machines. Rows of consoles formed a semicircle around a central control platform, where a large screen displayed the facility's network, now overlaid with the glowing emblem. The air was cooler here, the hum of the systems deeper, like a low chant in the bones of the building. She moved to the central console, setting her small weathered ID on the panel. It lit up immediately, not with a request for credentials, but with a quiet acceptance that rippled through the room like a soft exhale. "Authorization recognized," the system intoned in a calm, neutral voice. "Agent Walker, Master Override initiated." The words echoed against the steel and glass of the room, reaching the ears of the staff standing just outside, who exchanged frightened glances, each of them realizing that the name meant something, even if they didn't know what. Josh stood at the doorway, unable to step inside, unable to look away. The lights on the consoles began to change, shifting into manual override mode, the golden emblem appearing on every screen. Data streams realigned, security protocols resetting, automated defense systems deactivating before reinitializing under a different hierarchy. Her hierarchy. In that moment, Walker closed her eyes briefly, a memory flickering in the darkness behind her eyelids. She remembered standing in a similar room years ago, her hair longer then, her hands steady as she coded lines that would become the backbone of this facility's security architecture. She remembered the meetings with generals who now existed only as portraits on walls, men who had deferred to her without realizing it, who had trusted her to build the protocols they would later pretend to understand. She remembered the endless nights of writing fail-safes and contingencies, building the invisible skeleton that held up their world while they debated policies in warm offices. She had built this system. Not the men who now guarded the doors. Not the analysts who stared in confusion at their screens. Not the young guards who had laughed at her at the checkpoint. She had written the protocols that told this building how to recognize a threat, how to respond to a command, how to determine who was in charge when the usual chains of command fell silent. And now, she was here to reclaim what she had built. The system's voice spoke again, calm and final. Manual control transferred, awaiting directives. Walker opened her eyes, looking at the screens surrounding her, each one displaying her badge number, her name, her authority confirmed by the system she had designed. She felt neither pride nor triumph in that moment, only the steady calm of someone who had never doubted this day would come. Outside the room, the whispers grew. "Who is she?" someone asked, voice shaken. "She's the one who wrote the protocols," another replied softly, awe and fear threading through each word. And in that quiet, Josh felt the truth settle deep inside him, heavier than the badge he still held in his hand. She wasn't here to prove herself. She wasn't here to fight for her place. She was here because she had always been the foundation they had built their authority on without ever understanding who had given it to them. She was the one who had written the rules they had laughed about, and now the rules answered to her. As she stood at the console, the facility reconfiguring itself to her presence, the screens shifting to await her instructions, Josh lowered his eyes, the last fragments of his arrogance dissolving under the realization that the woman he had mocked had never needed to demand respect. She already owned it. And, as the lights dimmed around her, focusing on the platform where she stood, the facility fell silent again, not in fear, but in the quiet, total acknowledgement of command. The silence was deeper than any shout could have been. It was the silence of legacy, and everyone felt it. The quiet was almost alive. It filled every hallway, slipping under doors and around corners, pressing against the skin of those who tried to pretend they weren't listening. It hummed in the wires behind the walls, in the vents that sighed softly overhead, in the faint hum of lights that now burned steadily wherever she walked. Agent Walker stood at the center console, the screens around her casting shifting patterns of gold and green across her calm, dark face. She hadn't moved in several minutes, her hands resting lightly on the edges of the console, eyes scanning the streams of data that scrolled across the displays. Outside the glass walls, staff moved in slow, careful motions, voices low, as if speaking too loudly might break whatever fragile balance held the building together now. Even those who hadn't seen her enter felt the change, the unspoken certainty that something had shifted in a way that would not shift back. On the second level above the control room, Clark and Riley stood near the glass, watching her, the golden emblem still pulsing on the monitors behind them. Riley leaned closer, his voice low. "Do you think she's shutting us down?" Clark shook his head slowly, unable to look away. "No, she's waking it up." Back near the entrance, Josh stood with Randy and Mike, each of them silent, backs pressed against the wall, hands still, eyes locked on the distant figure of the woman they had mocked. Josh felt the badge in his hand like a weight tied to his ribs, heavy, cold. Every time he tried to swallow, the memory of his laughter burned in the back of his throat. He had thought power was in the uniform, in the badge they wore, in the weapons they carried at their hips. Now he saw power in the way she didn't flinch, didn't need to speak, didn't need to raise her voice or flash credentials. Power was in the way the system itself recognized her, bent to her, opened for her without question, without resistance. And the worst part was, she hadn't even looked at them since that first moment at the checkpoint. She hadn't needed to. The silence she left behind was enough. In the control room, the last of the security locks disengaged, the final systems shifting under her control with a soft chime that echoed in the vast space. Walker lifted her gaze to the screens, each one now displaying the emblem, the system awaiting her directive. For a moment, the past pressed against her mind. The years she had spent building these protocols, designing the security layers these men now wore like armor, without ever understanding where they had come from. She remembered the meetings where her voice had been quiet but final, the moments where generals had deferred to her because they knew she was the only one in the room who understood what held their world together. She had built it all, line by line, system by system, creating the skeleton they now lived within. And they had laughed, not because they were brave, but because they were ignorant. She took a slow breath, her eyes calm, steady, the weight of her own history resting quietly in the set of her shoulders. She stepped back from the console, and the lights above dimmed slightly, adjusting to her movement. The system recognized the change, pausing its processes, waiting for her next command. She turned, and the agents who had come with her fell into step at her sides without a word. Outside the control room, the staff stood frozen, their eyes widening as the doors opened for her, the lights brightening softly along her path. She walked past them, her gaze forward, steady, not sparing them a glance, not needing to. They stepped back instinctively, creating a clear path, some of them lowering their eyes, others watching her with a mix of fear and reluctant respect. As she walked, the building followed her, the sensors tracking her movement, the automated systems adjusting to her presence, recognizing her authority without question. Josh felt his knees weaken as she approached, his fingers gripping the badge so tightly the plastic dug into his palm. He opened his mouth, the words forming before he even knew what they were. "I'm sorry," he whispered, barely a breath, his voice breaking under the weight of it. Walker paused, turning her head slightly toward him, her dark eyes meeting his for the first time since the checkpoint. She studied him for a single, heavy moment. "Don't be," she said softly, her voice calm, even gentle, but the words were final, carrying the weight of a judgment already made. "Just don't laugh at what you don't understand." She turned away, continuing down the hall, the agents falling back into step with her. Josh stood there, breath caught in his chest, feeling the weight of those words settle over him, knowing he would carry them long after she was gone. As she moved toward the exit, the facility adjusted again, the outer doors unlocking without a sound, open into the dawn that was beginning to break across the concrete courtyard outside. A black vehicle pulled up, the tires whispering against the pavement, the doors opening as she approached. The agents moved ahead, checking the perimeter, though they knew it was unnecessary. Walker paused at the threshold, turning her head to glance back one last time, her gaze sweeping over the facility she had built, the people who lived in the world she had created, the system that had awakened at her presence. There was no triumph in her eyes, no pride, only the calm acknowledgement of a truth that'd always been there, waiting beneath the surface. She stepped into the vehicle, the door closing softly behind her. Inside the facility, the lights slowly returned to normal, the systems stabilizing, the screens flickering back to their routine displays. The golden emblem remained for a few more moments before fading, leaving behind the regular data streams that once felt like control but now felt like borrowed time. The staff began to move again, slowly, cautiously, as if testing the ground beneath their feet. No reports were filed. No one dared to document what had happened. But every person who had seen her, every person who had felt the silence she left behind, remembered her face. And none of them ever laughed again, because they had seen what true authority looked like: quiet, absolute, unshakable. And they knew without a doubt that it was never theirs to mock. If this story gave you chills, make sure to subscribe for more. Check out our other videos for stories you won't forget, and share this video with someone who needs to see it. Thanks for watching.